Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are, whenever you're able to tune into this Hidden Conversation episode. My name's Dave Sleet. I'm Managing Director of A&A Psychological Accreditation. And for this conversation, I am delighted to be joined by Jacqui Kershaw. Jacqui, good morning, good afternoon. Where are we at, actually? It is still good morning.
It is morning for us, yes.
Good morning. How are you?
I'm fine, thank you, Dave. The fact that we're having a hidden conversation is really, really good this morning, because I'm going to talk about all the things that are hidden within psychotherapy and education.
I'm really looking forward to this. I know this is a topic that is extremely close to your heart, and within APA, as you know, we are working at developing the endorsed learning collection for those education providers that are working to promote ethical student learning in the world of psychology and therapy. But this isn't where this conversation is going to go today, is it?
No.
We are actually going to be talking about what's happening in schools, in colleges and universities around the country, and this idea of the school counsellor. And what does that actually mean in practice? Because there's been some major kind of announcements this year from our political establishment. We saw previous to the last general election, major commitments to having counsellors in schools. And we've also seen that rolled out in pilots where it was lasted for a year and then was removed because funding wasn't able to continue. That to me seems much of what we're hearing now. Is that the same sense that you're getting?
Yes. The reason I came to be at my school is because I did one of those pilots many years ago. Well, I say many, 6 years ago, I did that pilot.
Okay.
I went to 5 schools. The figures were phenomenal, but it was then decided, despite the figures, that we'd had a really good uptake, really good outcomes, and what they wanted, it was then decided that the money would be better spent in OOMS here, which is Essex's equivalent of CAMS.
Okay.
Because at the time, CAMS had a 12-month waiting list. So the money was then going to be diverted back into OOMS in order to reduce the waiting list.
Yeah.
So I was in a position on the very last day of term where the DSL said to me, what are we going to do? We've had all these kids come in and pour their heart out to you. You've flagged some really, really important things and we can't carry on. And I said, well, we will carry on because I'm going to be here in September. I don't know how and in what capacity yet, but I will be here. And I kept to my word. And in 5 years, I've gone from myself donating 3 hours a week to then being asked if I could donate, could they match it with funding? And I said yes. And then that went up because it obviously wasn't enough. To 5 years later, I have been there all that time, right the way through the pandemic, everything, been there all that time. I now have 2 student counsellors in placement who have also worked remarkably well all the way through the pandemic.
And congratulations for that progress, because it's shown how effective therapeutic work can be delivered without a lot of the bottlenecks and everything else that we know about within the sector. One of the things that I wanted to ask you is around the perception of education and therapy. And do you think that the general public has an accurate understanding of how therapy is delivered within the school setting?
No, I don't.
Okay.
I think, if anything, the general public will think that it is delivered in the same way that we deliver it outside. Say, for argument's sake, somebody's child goes to CAMS, and it follows a set routine. Well, so does ours. Ours follows a set routine. However, I do make sure that I have a space every single week of those 39 weeks of the year, and even more in the pandemic because we work through the holidays as well, to flag up any issues. So that's the difference between on-site counselling and outside counselling. The fact that there isn't somebody there that can flag something up. Now, the alternative to this is to have something outside that has the capacity to do exactly what I do in school, but off-site.
Yeah, we know that wait lists across the UK have spiraled when it comes to anything to do with mental health. So we've had conversations in the past around some of the reasons behind that. If anybody wants to check out those videos, then check out the rest of the channel. You're looking at the conversations around SCOPED, looking at conversations around the bottleneck, and those videos are there. The general consensus when someone says we've got a school counsellor seems to be that this is somebody that is qualified as a counsellor in order to work with a minor. In your experience, is that entirely accurate?
No, not necessarily. I know of counsellors in other schools that don't take on student counsellors because they don't have the capacity to be able to supervise them properly. I also know of other organisations who have student counsellors in schools, but the general public is not always aware that their children are being seen by a trainee.
And that's quite frightening for a lot of people to kind of understand. But for a lot of professionals, it's like, well, that's where students learn. And therefore there is this kind of conflict. How is a student going to learn if they don't get in front of somebody at some point? And what's your thoughts on that process?
There is nothing wrong with having your students in counselling. I was a student once. You know, my 100 hours was so valuable. In fact, it was much more than 100 hours that I did because I carried on. But they are something that you will remember forever. But they're only good if you have robust policies and robust supervision. So, for argument's sake, with me, I do every single assessment that there is for every student that comes into my organisation. I do the assessments and I do them myself. And it's by doing that assessment, because quite often students will tell me something that they will not tell the head of year. I do that assessment, and then if I think one of my student counsellors is experienced enough to take that student, then I will send them there.
Yeah.
If not, then I will take that student myself.
Yeah. Do you think, I mean, I want to come on to that kind of assessment process and the measures in a moment. Do you think that a parent, and run the sequence, that the assessment is done, all of the policies, all of the protocols are in place, and a parent says, great, I just want my child to have some support. That's fabulous. Great. You've got a counsellor. Brilliant. They go. Something gets disclosed to that trainee that trainee is not prepared for, is not ready for. And that child or that young person adversely reacts to the reaction of the trainee. And the parent at that point discovers that the professional in front of their child is a trainee. Because there's been no transparency in that system, because we've been based on the sector's gone, yes, trainee, it's great, we've got the protocols, we've got this, but without the transparency, do you think it can damage the trust that parent has, that child then has, with not just the therapeutic process, but the education arena as well?
Yes, I do. You see, the thing is, we talk in therapy, we talk about children, we talk about young people. Okay, so we've got children in education up until year 6. When they come into year 7, which is at age 11 and upwards, they're then young people. Okay, it comes down to Gillick competence. So Gillick competence is age 13. That's where it's put. Under the age of 13, a parent has to know that their child is being seen. Over the age of 13 and over, we as therapists have to assess whether that child, that young person, has enough competence to understand the implications if they don't tell the parent. For argument's sake, if they disclose something that has to be flagged as a safeguarding issue, then it will have to be shared. Now, what I use with my students is I tell them that it's all confidential unless they tell me that they are going to harm themselves, somebody else, something to do with terrorism, etc., etc. But what I say to them is, if I feel that I've heard something that gives me a red flag, I'm going to disclose it, but I will tell them first. So that when they go home, mum or dad is going to say, why the hell didn't you tell me? They're going to know that mum and dad are going to know.
And this is where, for me, the sector's transparency to the outside world around the use of trainees, the use of volunteers, has got to be put into the mix.
Absolutely. I think we should be open and we should be honest about doing that. Anybody who goes to my student counsellor, if I will tell a student that they're seeing a student counsellor at assessment. If they say, I'd rather not, I don't do it. They'll wait for me. But they know, the school know as well. But when it comes to younger children who are not Gillick competent, if there are organisations that are not telling those parents that they are being seen by students, for me, it's unethical.
And
potentially dangerous.
Yeah, and we've heard a lot being spoken about recently about getting well-being practitioners and pastoral care coordinators and all of these wonderful titles into the school system in order to help with the mental health of young people. But when we drill down onto who are those practitioners, what we find is it's exactly the same practitioners as they are currently, and they are the trainees that are going through a level 4 diploma course in order to qualify as a professional.
For anybody that's watching, if they'd like to Google educational wellbeing practitioner, that's all I'm going to say.
Okay, and then I will leave it there. You guys can go.
That's the homework.
Yeah,
because go. I think you'd all be rather surprised.
Yeah, and I
rather surprised.
Yeah, and I think when we look at the organisations that have become established in the world of educational therapy, it is quite telling at how often we see that transparency direct to parents, and giving parents that choice as to who is in front of their child and their young.
I personally know somebody who is now doing something completely different. But many years ago, I met somebody who was training and was fortunate enough to get a placement on the NHS.
Mm-hmm.
And to cut a long story short, there was a death within that trainees unit. She wasn't the therapist, but it affected the whole team so badly that 7 out of those 10 dropped out.
Wow. And this is the impact on the professional as well, that I think is quite often overlooked, because the best professionals understand self-awareness is the key factor in the effectiveness of their engagement with a client, whether that is a child, whether that's a young person, whether that's a veteran, whether that is someone who is in clinical environment. But when a trainee is presented with something that hasn't been flagged up in assessment, it comes out of left field because it's been buried for so long, that their reaction has an impact on that person in front of them.
It's so important, Dave, so important. This is a purely hypothetical example, okay? As a therapist, if a child or a young person discloses current or historic abuse, you must end the session there and then. The problem is, how, as a trainee, do you say, okay, well, thanks for telling me that, but I'm sorry, I can't continue any longer? Because where's the training for that?
And this is a cliff edge moment for that disclosure.
Exactly.
And the response and the aftercare from a disclosure is vital. And as as anyone who has experienced that on either side of that equation, making a disclosure is a massive, massive step.
So brave.
It is literally jumping out of a plane, and you are trusting the person that you have disclosed to pull the parachute. And this sense of I have to stop and I have to then deal with the disclosure has to be done in such a way that that disclosure does not just plummet to the floor. Because recovering from that is going to be just as hard as getting to the edge of the plane to make the disclosure. And trainees, I haven't seen a single course for a level 4 qualified professional that in any way prepares somebody for that. And this is why when anything happens, the parent of that young person is going to have the trust in those policies, protocols to be able to manage that situation. And as soon as you turn around to a parent and say, well, the professional was a trainee, and that's the first they've heard of it, the entire relationship, however good the policies and protocols are, is new. It's not going to work. And this is where I think the therapeutic sector as a whole has to look at the training and education.
Absolutely. I mean, when you do safeguarding training, then it will tell you that if somebody discloses exactly what you have to do.
Mm-hmm.
But if you are in training and you are not a DSL, the likelihood is if you have done any safeguarding training, it will be very minimal.
Mm.
Okay, in order to be able to respond to somebody who has just told you their deepest, darkest secret and not go, what the hell did I just listen to? And, oh my word, what am I going to do now? It takes a lot of work. We're talking a lot of triad work.
Mm.
It is so important.
Mm. That moment,
every single student counsellor that I have has child sexual exploitation training, safeguarding training. They have that paid for by me, by my organisation, because I wouldn't want any of my students who I've had before, who I've got now, to be in a position where, for argument's sake, I saw once it was a training video, but even so, somebody was given this exact same scenario. Okay, it was a training, but given the exact same scenario, didn't know what was going to happen, and got up and said, "Oh, excuse me," and left the room.
Yeah. And this is where that moment of reaction becomes the biggest receptor to that young person or that individual, because ultimately the point of disclosure can happen at any point. But there is also a different pathway in the response, whether it is current abuse that's being disclosed or it's historic abuse that's being disclosed. And if someone is not aware of the different pathways that come from each of those, they will potentially throw out any subsequent legal action that young person or that individual chooses to take at a later point. And that can then not only re-traumatize that individual, But what does it do for the trainee who wasn't in a place to be able to deal with that in that reactionary moment? Now, I know there are going to be people that say, no, none of us know how we're going to react when it happens live. But
no, I agree. Nobody knows. Nobody knows.
And that's why making sure that that transparency to parents is there, because they become, when they know what the situation is, when they know that's the situation, they can support the professional and the process and disclosure in a much better way than feeling as though they've been deceived by the presentation of a counsellor.
And bearing in mind how much sexual abuse goes on in schools, and there's probably going to be no school in the whole land that's going to thank me for saying that. But I need everybody to know that when you hear the words peer-on-peer abuse, it means that somebody has been groped.
At the minimum. At
the minimum.
And this is again another way that our education system, our care system, our political system puts an umbrella term over something, so we can't actually see the details of what's going on behind that screen. And in essence, peer-on-peer assaults or peer-on-peer abuse is child sexual activity among peers. That's it. But it's unwanted interactions. If that child was an adult, we would call it sexual assault. We would treat it as sexual assault, and we know what we're dealing with.
And if it was an adult to a child, somebody under the age of 18, we would be calling it child sexual exploitation.
Yes.
And grooming.
And when we look at what does it do to the child that has received that unwanted assault, to then be told, well, it's just peer on peer, it's fine. We'll give them, we'll sit them down with the head teacher and we'll put them on a course. But you've still got to go into class with that individual. I'm not being funny. At what point do we start calling that abuse? We are not only are we re-traumatizing children because we can't deal with the fact that we have not put boundaries in place for that abuse to take place. Not only that, we are not putting in the consequences of actions in any way, shape or form that does not disrespect or devalue the victim of that abuse.
Spot on.
It's time that the therapeutic sector started using its psychological awareness to educate, guide, and grow better responses. Because believe it or not, teachers and the education sector are great in the main at talking to children until something goes wrong, in which case they need support. They need the therapeutic sector to be saying, this is what you need to be aware of. And this is why this is a hidden conversation, because this doesn't get spoken about widely, because we accept those blanket terms, we accept that peer-on-peer abuse. Well, no, let's take that banner away and stop letting people hide behind assault, abuse, exploitation. Because ultimately, if we don't, we are teaching young people who are assaulted that's okay.
Yeah, and it's wrong, and it sends out all the wrong messages to both the victim and the other student that has done what they have done. Sends out the completely wrong message.
But it becomes a seed of wrong message that grows into behavioural opportunities later.
The problem is, because we're not allowed, as it were, to speak freely. You know, bullying is called conflict resolution. You know, so when, for argument's sake, if just say, for argument's sake, a school in Scotland has a really big bullying problem for whatever reason, but there's a little nucleus of people who are doing the bullying, okay? They can then have workshops that show them how their behaviour has such a bad impact on other people. One of the things that I do when I do that sort of training is to use an apple. And I get people to talk to the apple and tell it how nasty it is and all the rest of it. And then on the next day, I bring that apple in, having left it, and it's gone all brown and mouldy, and show them how those people could be feeling inside. But we're not allowed to call these workshops. This is what happens when you bully someone.
Yeah,
we have to call it conflict resolution.
Yeah, and this is again the education sector putting a banner label over something so we don't deal with the realities. Let me share the experience with regards to bullying, because APA does offer storytelling workshops into schools, and we came about this from a very, very different approach to what a lot of the system has developed. The system of bullying unawareness in the UK is generally the same now as it was when I was at school, 30 years ago. And when we were developing the storytelling workshops, I sat in on a workshop being delivered in a school where it was openly told this is going to be about bullying. Right, we're going to sit, we're going to talk about this, we're going to look at all of the factors, everything else. And I just watched the body language of the pupils in the room. One pupil went like this. Right? The pupil sat next to that child went like this. They went through their workshop. The bully, not about me, I don't bully nobody. The child sat next to it was the victim of that bully, who couldn't engage with it because it was sat next to the bully. And because it was, this is all about bullying, the shutters had already gone up on both of them. So the school got to tick its box. We've delivered our anti-bullying program. Fabulous. The school's done its bit. We don't have a bullying program because we've delivered our workshop. Those two young people were in exactly the same situation, if not worse, than before that workshop. So the workshops that APA deliver come at this from a very, very different approach, because we're using the psychological awareness of the people in the room. We ask young people to help us produce a storybook for the school to sell. We have the story, they're going to produce the artwork. And the story is designed for 5, 6, and 7-year-olds. The people in the room are 8, 9, and 10. So we are using the psychological factor of supporting somebody else to understand that sequence but also working with the professionals so they understand that bullying is not in isolation. It is not about the relationship between those 2 or 3 or 4 individuals in the school. This is not a vacuum. We do not live in vacuums. We cannot do workshops based in vacuums. Because otherwise, sit there, the rollers go up, don't need to know. Thank you very much. Go out, carry on as they were. And this is why I think the education arena has really got to get its grips with understanding psychology in a way that works for the schools, but in a way that works for everybody that's connected, parent, faculty, and students. Do you think that in 10 years, we would look back at the bullying situation now and say, this was a turning point? And the reason that I ask is because we're now seeing that adult bullying is at its highest level.
I would like to think so, but having delivered many workshops on abuse and how to prevent it, and in terms of abuse, we also include bullying and how to prevent it happening. In the 5 years, like you say, it's been worse than ever. Okay, we have had the fact that we've had COVID, we've had lockdown, and there's families in crisis, and there's all those other things. But if we all as a nation go, well, yes, little Sparky over there, he might be a bit of a bully, but he was kept at home for all those months with a father that's a bully. But that is just saying, although he's a bully, that's okay, because we're giving him an excuse. What we're doing is we are giving far too many excuses for why all these things are happening.
Rather than actually getting, it's almost, we're dealing with the reaction, we're not dealing with
exactly. We as a nation are reactive, we are not proactive.
Yeah, and I'd rather we got to a point where we were responsive to the factors rather than reacting to the symptoms.
Absolutely. Proactive has got to be. Prevention is better than cure.
Yeah.
And I say that in every single workshop that I do.
Yeah.
Prevention is better than cure. Yeah. But it needs the whole family approach. Because if we're teaching the kids not to do something, but they're going home and seeing it done, what are we going to achieve? Absolutely nothing.
Yeah. It has to be done holistic, and this is where we've seen examples coming with the new frameworks within education to have more kind of family engagement and more external activities and a more external classroom engagement than we probably ever seen before.
Yeah.
Still missing the emotional impacts of what someone's going through. I don't think I've ever asked anybody how they think. I have asked people how they feel. And when we start looking at the emotional, how do we feel about something, then we can start looking at, well, it's that feeling that's generating that thought. Yeah. And this is where the VC method that Siobhan, APA's CEO, has designed over 20 years ago really plays into its own. And it's been it kind of mirrors something that, you know, a lot of therapists have said over the years, a lot of psychologists, even the Dalai Lama has said, if we can teach our 7-year-olds how to connect to their feelings, we are going to change the way they act in the world. Now, I don't, you know, I'm not kind of running around after the Dalai Lama.
Mm.
This is not rocket science.
No.
The human condition is made up of psychological, emotional, and physical. That's the human triad. And our young people are more in tune with their emotional center than they are with any of the other two. Yet the adults are more attuned to the physical, and now they're being driven towards the psychological. They're still not being given the emotional. So how can that focus on the mental thought pattern be communicated to a being that is still developing its emotional responses? You're not talking the same language. And until we get to a point where it's emotional first, psychological second, physical consequence third, we don't stand a chance within our education arena. But that comes from the education arena accepting that actually the psychological understanding has got to be put and woven through their frameworks.
Because there is a culture of grades. You know, you've got to get these grades to achieve anything. You have to do this to achieve anything. If you don't, you can't do this, or if you don't, you can't do that. But I have said for a long, long time that happier students make for happier learning.
Yeah.
Very, very, very few students will walk into a room and cause an absolute disruption because they feel like it.
Yeah. There's always something that causes that emotional.
Exactly. And I speak from experience, Dave. I hated maths. I couldn't do maths. And when I lived up north for a while, I was humiliated at the age of 7 by my maths teacher, who stood me in the corner with my hands on my head and told the whole class that I was a thick southerner because I couldn't get the times table. Now, the truth is, one, we were taught differently down south to the way they taught tables up north. But secondly, I have dyscalculia. Didn't find out till years later, but I have it. So when I see a load of numbers, chances are out of every 40 list of numbers, I will possibly get it wrong unless I repeat it back to myself. And even then I'll say, can you repeat that? Yeah. I hated maths. In senior school, I used to go into my classroom and probably 5 minutes I'd be in there, knowing I was going to get a good hiding when I went home for getting chucked out of class. But I would rather get chucked out of class, get a good hiding at home, or be punished and I was grounded, or as my dad used to call it, confined to barracks. Seriously, I would rather have that than go into the class and feel humiliated because it was all mumbo jumbo to me. Yeah,
and this is the kind of the sense that I get, and you know, I think most people will have a horror story from some interaction within their educational period, right? And what struck me, I spent 22 years researching the psychological high. And When I was looking at that, and I was looking at the most successful people in the world, the vast majority of them did not finish school. And it struck me that with a lifespan of 90 years, our statutory education period is 10% of our life. And the vast majority of our learning is done in the other 90%. The educational framework that we have been given has been based on a Victorian model of getting people to complete lists in order to work for somebody else, just to do things without question. Well, that was how we survived the Industrial Revolution. And in case anybody is wondering, the Industrial Revolution was ended by those workers going, hold on, we've just done ourselves out of work. Because they worked out that we're being taught to get things to do things that they then don't need us to do. We are going through a digital revolution, an AI revolution, and we're still using the same baseline educational model. We're not accepting that we now understand more about the psychological impacts. We understand more about neurodiversity than we've ever understood before. Yet we are not relating that into the framework of education. We're telling adults that we've got to move from an employed economy to a gig economy. This idea of a job for life, well, that doesn't even exist with the military anymore.
No.
This is about adaptation. This is about survival. This is about flexibility. Yet our education system is still rooted in the past.
Which leads me very much, Dave, into my next project. Now, having built my counselling service in school very successfully, I had a couple of choices, and as you know, I thought long and hard about what I was going to do. And one of the things that I was going to do was to roll out what I've done to other therapists so that they could replicate what I have done.
And this was something that APA looked at, and APA...
And we've worked closely together for a good couple of years on this now, for the right time. However, because government had said that they were going to have a counsellor in every school by 2021, and they haven't, they have come up with a few alternatives because of that and because of the pandemic. So because of the pandemic, the educational wellbeing practitioners was run out quickly. I have nothing against educational wellbeing practitioners. The more people that we can get into schools, the better. However, although it's a pilot right now in certain areas, that does not mean to say that it won't become permanent. Educational wellbeing practitioners can join with no previous experience in some areas, others different criteria, and they go to university 1 day a week, and they can work for a year in school. However, they can only take mild to moderate anxiety. Anything else, they are going to have to send that to someone else. Okay? So there's that. They have supervision with the organisation that's doing the pilot, but it's important for everybody to know, including the parents, if their child is being seen by an educational welfare practitioner, chances are they're going to be one of the trainees. I'm not saying they're not going to roll out qualified later when they get the data from it. Alongside that, government has now pledged millions of pounds for September for wellbeing and therapy. What that actually works out at is a pastoral lead who is going to have 6 months of training in mental health welfare and various, or a myriad of subjects over those 6 months. Now, I trained for 5.5 years to do the job that I do, as have a lot of other therapists who are going to be watching this, and even more. Like I said, I've said it many a times, I continue to learn now. And it's all very well saying, oh yes, every single school is going to have this pastoral lead who is trained. However, when they need to send someone to a counsellor, they can't go to the educational welfare practitioner because they can only take mild anxiety and depression. So they've got to send it somewhere else. They've got to send that referral outside. Where are they going to send it? Are they going to send it to CAMS? Well, if you're lucky, you might have a 9-month wait. So they're expecting those leads in those schools to do an awful lot. And to me, I could be wrong. I've not seen the training package, but it almost sounds like to me, the mental health practitioner, the mental health first aider, rebranded.
Yeah. And it almost seems like a step backwards to the idea that counselling is a chat and a cup of tea.
Exactly. And the thing is,
very
what is going to happen now is schools are going to go, right, budgets are really tight, especially because of COVID. And the fact that wherever you go in the UK, there's new houses being sprung up here, there and everywhere, but no new schools, no new health centres, no new this and no new that. Schools are at their absolute limit. So paying for qualified counsellors is going to be way down on the list of priorities. Yeah.
And as long as the box that says we've got somebody that understands mental health, thank you very much.
Yeah, that's a box that's ticked.
And as we know, when therapy and psychology is not actively effective, it is counterproductive.
Exactly.
It's an invisible scalpel.
Yeah.
This is why therapy should only be delivered face-to-face or across direct contact platforms by those professionals that are qualified, that have been through that 450 hours of minimum of studying.
Absolutely. Yes. Absolutely.
Plus of placement work, support, supervision in place. And when I say supervision in place, I don't mean somebody who sits there, fills out a form to say you arrived. I mean meaningful, active, qualified supervision. Insurance. This is another factor that the education sector seems to have completely bypassed. If you have a practitioner of any kind, they have to be insured. They are messing, in the worst case scenario, with somebody's entire thought pattern. Psychology and therapy is an invisible scalpel. And if we do put that scalpel in the hands of someone who is not ready, who is not qualified, they are going to do damage. But more than that, every time a therapist uses that invisible scalpel, they are training their client how to use it for themselves. And if we train them badly, they will use that invisible scalpel on other people badly. We've got to get this right. We have got so much that has been misrepresented, misunderstood, and misdelivered. That until we get out of the silos and we start actually using psychology in the way that we know that it works, we are not going to resolve the situation in schools. And our young people are going to carry on into adulthood, into employment, into self-employment in a way that's going to...
Exactly. And I took a heartbreaking decision, Dave, to say, I'm not going to stay at school. Not because they don't want to pay me, because they've already said I can name my price. But one of the reasons I'm not prepared to do that is because I think that what government is doing is going to give us dangerous practice.
Yeah.
Like you say, insurance, supervision, and everything else.
Yeah.
And I am not prepared for somebody has something happen to them or does something to themselves, and one of my practitioners gets thrown under the bus. I'm not prepared to do that.
Yeah. And this is the strain on the overall effective system gets tighter and tighter and tighter.
Exactly. So one of the things that we've been able to establish is the fact that we have done a little pilot of our own, and we have been able to counsel students, but also parents of students who are struggling. Obviously not with the same counsellor, because that would be a complete conflict of interest. But we have been able to do that. Okay, as far as I'm concerned, that's our unique selling point.
And that's going to be added to, isn't it?
Yeah, we're not doing family therapy. We are, because that's not what we do. What we are doing is we are counselling a student, and then if it's the parent that's rung in and said, please get little Sparky some help because I can't cope, we are offering that extra piece of therapy. So what I'm setting up at the moment is I am going...
Drum roll, please, ladies and gentlemen.
Yeah. My intention is to use what I was going to do, but vary it slightly. So instead of being counselling and education, what we're going to have is well-being and interventions. Okay? Because the well-being, the interventions that we are going to offer is going to affect the well-being of all the people that come in to see us, whether that is mental health, physical health. There's a myriad of things. There's a whole plethora of things that we're intending to do.
And the phenomenal part of the project that you're putting together, and I know this is kind of a kind of pre-announcement, really, isn't it?
Yes.
That just to let people know that not only is Jacqui putting together that level of support for the direct work, but we're also going to be contributing to that from the Community Learning Hive. And one of the packages that APA offers through the Learning Hive is supporting families and young people and professionals in group settings. And we're going to look at running those packages alongside Jacqui's package. And that gives a completely holistic support environment for everybody without crossing any ethical boundaries or any confidentiality.
Absolutely.
Because the group work doesn't touch on the direct work. The group work focuses on resilience skill sets that people become open to because of the direct work. So it is a very symbiotic partnership that has been developed, and I'm really glad that over the coming weeks we're going to be able to actually solidify that, put that together, and make a formal announcement later in the year. But Jacqui, I want to say thank you for the conversation. Well, it's this afternoon now. But more than that, I want to thank you for your contribution, not only to the world of therapy in education, but also your contribution to APA.
Thank you.
The work that you do to support the team is phenomenal. I also want to make sure that everyone is aware, Jacqui is one of the first recognized specialists in the area of 1976ers and domestic abuse, as well as everything that she does in education. So please check out Jacqui's biography on the directory. Please check out other videos on the YouTube channel. And I hope that just having this conversation has been able to enlighten people about some of the things that are happening behind the scenes of education and therapy. It's not as easy as the establishment quite often present. It's very, very complex. It's not easy for educators either. And this is why APA is constantly working, and Jacqui is too, at making sure the education arena understand and grow and are supported. This is not about beating up education for what?
No, not in any way. Do you know something? I wouldn't be a teacher for all the tea in China.
I applaud every single one of them.
Exactly. I have got nothing but admiration for them all.
Yeah. And
every one of them.
Yeah. And anyone that's working in education that is using their own psychological awareness to improve the work that they are doing, the interactions that they are having, don't forget, you can also be accredited for that self-awareness. You can become a psychologically alert member of APA. Check out that membership if this is something that is going to support you. Every single member of APA receives 2 hours of emergency supervision when they need it from qualified supervisors. You also have access every week to book a confidential time slot with one of the executives to get that additional support if you need it. Don't think that you are on your own fighting a losing battle with a system that doesn't really get what you know you need to be doing on the ground. You can be supported. APA is here. Jacqui, thank you so much for your time. For everyone at home, take care of each other, and we'll see you in another conversation very, very.
Thanks for everyone. Thank you, everyone. Bye.